LaAndrea Johnson, a name that echoed through the gospel music world like a powerful hymn, was a beacon of hope for many. She had risen to fame in 2010, winning the popular show Sunday Best, and quickly became a household name. With her strong, soulful voice and raw authenticity, she captivated listeners with her heart-wrenching songs that spoke of faith, struggle, and victory. For years, LaAndrea was seen as a symbol of strength, a gospel artist who had been through the toughest of times, but had managed to pull herself up time and time again. Her Grammy Awards, her powerful live performances, and her undeniable talent made her a legend in the gospel music industry. But behind all of that, there was something hidden from the world, a truth that was far darker and more painful than anyone could have imagined. For all her success, LaAndrea had her battles. Addiction, particularly to alcohol, had been a constant shadow in her life, and it wasn't something that could easily be hidden. Despite her fame, she couldn't outrun the demons that haunted her. But for a long time, the public saw only the glory, never the agony. Those closest to her knew that things were far from perfect behind closed doors, but they too struggled to help her overcome the addiction that threatened to destroy her life. Her family, particularly her son, watched as their mother, a woman they adored and admired, slowly succumbed to the very addiction that had threatened to take everything away from her. As her struggles continued, those closest to LaAndrea remained quiet, hoping for change, waiting for the moment she would realize her worth and fight back. But that moment never fully arrived. Instead, her son, who had been silently suffering for years, decided it was time to speak out. He had witnessed the toll addiction had taken on their family, and he could no longer stay silent. The pain of watching his mother battle with alcohol and seeing the effects it had on their relationship was something he could no longer hide. With a heavy heart, he came forward and shared his truth, the truth about the brokenness that ran deeper than anyone knew. He exposed the private pain, the disappointment, and the destruction that alcohol had brought into their lives. It was in this revelation that the world began to see LaAndrea Johnson in a different light. No longer just the gospel star they adored, but a mother struggling with addiction, a woman battling demons that were much stronger than the ones she sang about in her music. Her son's words hit hard, like a gut punch, forcing everyone to confront the reality that LaAndrea's perfect image was far from the truth. Fans who had followed her career for years felt torn. They loved her for her music, for the strength she had shown in public, but now they saw a different side of her, a side that was broken, human, and vulnerable. But the most shocking part of it all was the courage it took for her son to speak out. After years of pain, frustration, and confusion, he had finally broken the silence. And with his revelation came a painful realization. Addiction doesn't just hurt the person struggling with it, it destroys families, it fractures relationships, and it leaves scars that can last a lifetime. Her son's revelation was just the beginning, and as the story unfolded, the public was left wondering, what would happen next? Would LaAndrea finally face the truth about her addiction? Could she ever fully recover, or had the damage already been done? The shocking part wasn't just that her son spoke out. It was the way it made everyone question the narrative they had built around LaAndrea Johnson. Was she the same person they had admired for years, or had the addiction that nearly destroyed her family been hiding in plain sight all along? And so the stage was set. The revelation was out, and the truth was no longer something that could be hidden behind the veil of fame and success. What would LaAndrea do now? Would she fight to rebuild the life she had almost lost, or would she continue down the same destructive path? The questions lingered, and the world was waiting for answers. But in the back of everyone's mind, there was one question that stood out more than the rest. Could LaAndrea ever truly overcome the battle within herself? As the shockwaves of LaAndrea's son's revelations rippled through the media, The world quickly began to see the cracks in the perfect image they had painted of her. Leandria had always been more than just a gospel singer. She had been an inspiration to countless people who believed that faith could overcome anything. She had sung about redemption, triumph, and the power of God's love, becoming a voice for those who felt lost or hopeless. But now, that very voice seemed to be at odds with the woman she had become in private. As more details of her struggles came to light, the questions that had previously lingered in the air now felt impossible to ignore. Leandria's career, which had once been soaring, began to spiral downward. Her once flourishing music career was now tainted by her addiction. Her songs, once filled with power and hope, were now viewed with a bittersweet edge. People began to wonder, how could the same woman who had preached about overcoming struggles in her music be so unable to overcome her own personal demons? Her fans, the ones who had supported her through the highs of her career, were now grappling with a feeling of betrayal. They wanted to believe that she was still the same Leandria, the one who had inspired them, but the truth was hard to reconcile with the woman they were seeing in the headlines. Behind the scenes, Leandria's life was crumbling. The addiction, which had been a constant companion for years, had taken an even greater toll. Relationships with her family, particularly with her son, grew strained. There were arguments, misunderstandings, and moments of anger that seemed to grow more intense as the addiction took its toll. Leandria's own feelings of shame and guilt weighed heavily on her. Every day felt like a battle, not just with the addiction itself, but with the world's expectations of her. She had been seen as a role model, someone who could do no wrong, but the pressure to live up to that image had suffocated her. It felt like the walls were closing in on her, and for the first time, she questioned if she could truly find her way back. During this period of deep turmoil, Leandria made several public missteps. There were social media posts that hinted at her emotional fragility, interviews where she seemed to be on the verge of tears, and even moments where she appeared to have lost complete control. The public's fascination with her downfall was relentless, as they watched someone who had once been a shining star fade before their eyes. Yet, as much as the world seemed to revel in her struggles, there was something else bubbling beneath the surface: genuine concern. While some ridiculed her, others were deeply concerned for her well-being. They could see the pain, the desperation, and the brokenness in her eyes. But for every person who reached out with a hand of support, there were just as many who wanted to see her fail. The pressure from both sides was suffocating, and it seemed like there was no escape. Leandria was at her lowest point. The addiction had taken everything: her career, her family, and her sense of self. The woman who had once stood in front of thousands, strong and powerful, now felt small, insignificant, and defeated. But even in the depths of her despair, there was a flicker of hope. Something deep inside her refused to let her give up completely. But the question remained, was it too late? Had she already lost everything that mattered most? Meanwhile, her son continued to grapple with his emotions. The revelation he had shared with the world had been a cry for help, but it had come with its own consequences. His relationship with his mother, once close and filled with love, had become distant. He had hoped his mother would wake up and fight for herself, for their family, but instead, it felt like she was slipping further away. The pain of seeing his mother trapped in the cycle of addiction had caused him to retreat into himself. He felt torn between the love he had for her and the anger he felt for the hurt she had caused. But no matter how much he wanted to fix things, he knew the only person who could make the change was Leandria herself. As the months passed, it seemed like Leandria had become a shadow of her former self. The woman who had once been a beacon of hope now seemed lost in a world of darkness. The gospel music world, which had once embraced her with open arms, now looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and disappointment. Would she rise again, or had she fallen too far to ever find her way back? The questions continued to haunt her fans and her family alike. The world had seen the glory, but now they were witnessing the fall. The more LaAndrea tried to fight her addiction, the deeper she seemed to sink into it. It was a heartbreaking reality that no one had anticipated. What had once been a beautiful story of redemption now seemed like a tragic tale of a woman who had lost her way. LaAndrea sat alone in her quiet room, the weight of everything pressing down on her shoulders. The voices that once filled her head with the sound of her music, the love of her fans, and the hopes of her family now felt distant, like echoes fading into the void. She was alone with her thoughts of the past, of the things she had lost, and of the woman she had become. The addiction, which had once seemed like a way to escape, had become her prison. No matter how hard she tried, it felt like the chains were too tight to break. Yet, even in her darkest moments, a part of her refused to give up. There were days when the temptation to fall deeper into the abyss was overwhelming. But then there were the small moments, moments of clarity, of hope, that reminded her of the woman she had once been. She could still hear the voices of her fans, the ones who had believed in her from the beginning. They had stood by her even when the world turned its back. They hadn't given up on her, and for the first time in a long while, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she couldn't give up on herself. The road to redemption was never easy, and for LaAndrea, it felt like a never-ending battle. She had tried to face her addiction before, but each time she had faltered. This time, however, there was something different in the air, something that felt like a last chance, a final opportunity to reclaim the life she had once known. It wasn't going to be easy. The addiction had taken so much from her, but she had also taken something from herself, her own sense of worth, her faith, and her belief that she was capable of change. It was time to take those pieces back. As she sat in the quiet of her room, LaAndrea remembered the moments when her music had lifted people from the depths of despair. She remembered the faces of the people who had come to her concerts, the tears in their eyes as they sang along to the songs that had given them hope. She had been their light in the darkness, their reminder that redemption was possible. But now she had to become her own light. The hardest part wasn't just fighting the addiction. It was learning to forgive herself for the mistakes she had made. How could she preach about grace and mercy if she couldn't extend that same grace to herself? It wasn't just about the music anymore. It wasn't about the fame or the accolades that had once been so important to her. It was about healing, about finding peace in her soul and reclaiming the parts of herself that had been buried under the weight of shame and guilt. She knew it wouldn't happen overnight. She knew that the road ahead would be long and filled with setbacks, but she also knew that she had a choice. She could either continue down the path of destruction, or she could fight for her life, for her family, for her fans, and most importantly, for herself. Her son was always on her mind. The pain in his eyes haunted her. She had failed him as a mother, as someone he could look up to. But even through the anger and disappointment, she could see the love he still had for her. He wanted her to fight. He wanted her to be the woman she had once been. And for him, she was going to try. The first step was admitting that she needed help. It wasn't easy. Pride had kept her from asking for support in the past, but she couldn't do this alone anymore. She had to surround herself with people who cared about her, people who would help her stay on track, her fans, her family, her friends. They were all waiting for her to rise again. It was time to stop letting them down. There were days when the weight of the world felt unbearable. The pressure to be perfect, to live up to the image that people had of her, felt crushing. But in those moments of darkness when she wanted to give up, LaAndrea reminded herself of why she had started this journey in the first place. She had a purpose. She had a calling. The music had always been her way of reaching people, of touching lives, and she wasn't ready to let that go. But before she could share her light with others again, she needed to find it within herself. It wasn't just about fighting the addiction, it was about rebuilding the broken parts of herself, the parts that had been lost in the chaos of her career and her struggles. She had spent so much of her life trying to please others, to live up to the expectations of the world. But now she had to focus on what she needed to heal, to forgive, and to find the strength to move forward. Leandria knew the road ahead was uncertain. She didn't know if she would ever regain the fame she had once known, or if the world would ever look at her the same way again. But that didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she was still fighting. She was still breathing. And as long as she had breath in her lungs, she had the chance to make things right. LaAndrea woke up early the next morning, her mind clear, but her heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. There were still days when the memories of her struggles felt like an anchor pulling her down into the past. But the difference now was that she was ready to face them. She had spent weeks in therapy, slowly rebuilding the foundation of her life, and each day had brought small victories. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. She had learned to sit with the discomfort, to let herself feel the pain instead of hiding from it. She was learning to forgive herself, to stop punishing herself for the mistakes she had made. Her son had been her biggest motivator through it all. Every time she looked into his eyes, she saw the hope he still held for her. He was still waiting for his mother to come back, to be the strong, loving woman who had raised him. LaAndrea had made a promise to him, and it was one she intended to keep. She would rise above her past, no matter how long it took. Her music was still a huge part of her life, but now it was different. She had stopped seeing it as a way to gain fame or attention. It wasn't about the glitz and glamour anymore. It was about connecting with people, sharing her story, and reminding others that they weren't alone in their struggles. She had written songs in the past that had spoken to the hearts of her fans, but now she was writing for herself too. Her music had always been a reflection of her soul, but now it was an expression of her healing. It was time to return to the stage. The decision had come slowly, but now it felt like the right time. She wasn't ready to dive back into the spotlight fully, but she knew that the world needed to hear her story. She had always been a voice for the broken, the lost, the misunderstood, and now she could be that voice for herself. She had come to terms with the fact that her past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She was more than the mistakes she had made, more than the addiction that had almost consumed her. When she stepped onto the stage for the first time in months, the crowd was a mix of emotions. Some people were skeptical, unsure of whether she was ready to be back. Others cheered, eager to welcome her return. But as the music began, something shifted. The familiar rhythm of the beat felt like home. The stage, the lights, the energy of the crowd, it was like nothing had changed. The rush of performing, the connection with her fans, the joy of sharing her art, it was all still there. But this time it was different. This time it was real. This time it wasn't about pleasing anyone else. It was about embracing her truth, her journey, and the strength it had taken to get here. Her performance wasn't perfect. There were moments when she stumbled, moments when the old doubts crept in. But with each note, with each line of the song, she felt more and more like herself again. The crowd was with her, cheering, singing along, and lifting her up. It wasn't the applause that she sought. It was the connection, the understanding, and the love that she felt in that moment. After the show, as she sat in her dressing room, LaAndrea smiled for the first time in a long while. She had done it. She had faced her fears, her demons, and had emerged stronger on the other side. The road ahead was still long, and there would be challenges to come, but for the first time in a while, she felt hopeful. Her son came backstage to greet her, and when he wrapped his arms around her, she felt a deep sense of peace. This moment, this feeling, was what she had been fighting for. It was for him, for herself, and for everyone who had ever believed in her. She wasn't just a celebrity or an artist. She was a mother, a woman, and someone who had fought to reclaim her life. The crowd had given her a second chance, but it was more than that. She had given herself a second chance. She had learned that no matter how far you fall, you can always rise again. The journey to redemption wasn't easy, and it wasn't always pretty, but it was worth it. And LaAndrea knew that as long as she kept moving forward, there was always hope.